Hello, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about jigs. So a jig is something that you use to put a bend or create a shape in a piece of steel, and you want it to be exactly the same every time. So you could use a jig to create a scroll or put a hole in a hook. Here's an assortment of different jigs. Obviously we've got sort of scrolling jigs, and then these two are used for making hearts. So that's half a heart, make two, weld them together. This one is for making hooks, and so a useful thing to do on jigs is label them, as you make loads of jigs and then forget what they're used for. They just sit on a shelf and then you find them and it's like, what did I even use that for? So this one I've labelled 13, 19, so I know to cut a piece of steel at 13 centimetres and then draw it out, draw a taper on the end to 19. Then we can scroll it up into a hook or bend it up into a hook. The hook has a little scroll on the end which butts up against this little tab, and then you just simply bend it around. This one doesn't have a tab. This is for bending up fire baskets. And so you just clamp the piece of steel on there with a pair of mole grips and then bend. The problem with putting a tab of steel on there so that you can actually get a contacting to bend the steel, often when going around a radius it'll pull the steel out of the end, and so you're going to end up with pieces of steel with different lengths on. So by using a clamp you can prevent that and just clamp it in. It's never going to go anywhere and it'll just bend to the shape. On a jig like this you can just about get away with that with not having an insert, because really it probably should have an insert. If you're thinking about how you're actually bending this shape up, you're going to have a piece of bar there, bend around the first radius, but then that's going to end up with a bar coming over here. And so the good thing to do is to put an insert in there for the second bend, so that you can make the first bend without anything there, put an insert in and then bend it back. This one here is one that I made with an insert. It's very similar to that. So you had a piece of bar running in there, it then bent on this first radius, you then put an insert in which just had two 6mm bars. They went down into there with another bend on, so you bent the bar there and then put the insert in, bend it back. The most important thing when making a jig is to make it to the inside of whatever shape you're doing. When we actually use this jig, we'll be bending on the outside of it, and so we're always going to end up with, in this case, a scroll which is bigger than the jig. And so if you're going from a scroll to a jig, so you want to make a new jig for a specific scroll, then you have to make this piece of steel to the inside of whatever scroll you're trying to replicate. So the jig and the scroll aren't identical, they're slightly different. The jig itself is smaller and therefore the scroll is going to be bigger. When you're making a really tight scrolling jig, you have to sort of put it on a cone. So you start here and then go down, and that's so that you can actually get your bar in. As obviously when you're looking at this one, to get the bar in to start off with, if we had it parallel, you couldn't actually do it because it'll be butting up against there. So on this particular jig, all that I do is I start it off by hand, then clamp it on and bend it around, and you can get the bar in then. If I'm just putting a little scroll on the end, you can then get the bar in and bend it around. But if you're doing a really, really tight scroll, obviously half of that you're going to have to do by hand. And so to get around that, you can put it on, on a cone. So as it's scrolling, it goes down. And that way you can start off with the bar in and gradually bend it round. Yes, you're going to end up with a spiral scroll, but hopefully, because you're doing it on a jig, you're going to have the whole thing hot. You can just bend it up in one heat and then go to the anvil and straighten it really quickly. I don't just make bending jigs, all of these are bending jigs. I also do some cutting jigs, really, really simple, literally just a bar with an L bend in the end. And so you butt a piece of steel up against there, mark it on the end and just cut it to length. They're really, really simple, and yet they can save you so much time when you're cutting loads of steel. So So I'll get some steel in the fire and show you how I actually use some of these jigs. I'll put a little roll-up scroll on the end, and then I've quenched it off, and I can put that to butt up and sort of lock in place against that bar, and then simply just bend around, get a hammer just to finish it off, and there you go. Really simple, just to get the shape of the hook there. And it is important to quench that little roll-up scroll, otherwise it'll just unravel as you're pulling on it. When it's butting up against there, that will just unravel rather than actually bending around the corner. So I can clamp this with the mole grips and begin the bend on the first radius, and sort of, you see there, I'm bending the bar out, and then we can bend it into the corner. So there you are, that's how you get it coming into a double radius without putting an insert in. So all that I did was, as I'm bending on this first radius, you then pull out with this hand, sort of creating the second bend, but obviously it's not going to be perfect, so you then come in and shove it into the corner. So you see, I've just put a bit of a taper and then the beginning of the scroll on the end of the bar. This is just 10mm round bar. You can get the mole grips on there and then simply just go around. And with these jigs, I don't have to go all the way. You know, that's just a smaller scroll. And so you could just put a mark on your jig there, and then next time, you know, when you're bending it around, you just bend it to that mark and then you'll get the same scroll coming off. Not much to it really. This is quite an open scroll. It's not very tight, but as I said before, if you want a tight scroll, you sort of have to do the jig on a spiral, and then you see we've still got plenty of heat even now, so you can just bend it on a spiral, then quickly go to the anvil and flatten it back down. You don't have to use mole grips to hold it on the end. You can also just get in there with a pair of tongs, and also you can put a little lip on the end there, so you know every time that you're feeding, you know, you're not going to end up feeding too much bar through, so you're missing, you're going over the jig. You can put a little tab on there to make sure that you're definitely going to be the same length on your scroll. That's it for this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it and learned something about what jigs are, how a blacksmith like myself would actually use a jig. And often it is, you know, I've got a job to do which requires me making the same shape or doing the same, doing the same thing to a piece of steel lots and lots of times, and so to do that we just make a jig, and it's so much easier making a jig when you say you've got 100 things to make. It's so much quicker. The time that it saves you just to make a jig, it may take you an hour to make it, but then it's going to save you hours in actually making the thing that you've made the jig to make, if you understand what I mean. That's it. Thank you for watching the video, and I hope I'll see you on the next one.